start out in a subordinate position, right? If you look at the structure there. So you could think of doing reconstruction. So what you extraposed, you bring it back in, and then you have to have, like I said, I'm waving my hand here because this is not the actual way in which we would do this, but the idea being that you never have a free variable to begin with. That variable is a bound variable. And whichever way you want to do questions with quantifiers will apply to that. So this is a very nice illustration of the difference between subordinated and sequential scope marking. But now I'm going to, everyone okay with this, with the rough idea? Yeah? Let me go now to the other question. Setting aside, okay, there is a difference between subordinated and sequential. Remember, we had two ways of doing scope marking, direct and indirect dependency. I think sequential scope marking presents real problems for the direct dependency approach because you're taking two clauses and somehow you have to make it one. And that's hard. That's not at all clear how you would do it. But setting that aside, now I'm going to go back to the basic point, which is why did we even think of analyzing scope marking as extraction, the equivalent of extraction? And one thing that I would like to suggest is whenever one looks at things that look similar in, let's say, the basic cases, if your analysis actually separates them, sooner or later chances are you'll find something that doesn't quite work. So there should be hopefully some empirical evidence that can help you decide. And here are three examples that I'll give, three facts that I'll give you that promise to give you a distinction between the two approaches. Okay, so 16a, what do we know about coordinate structure constraints? Those who've studied syntax, can you extract out of a coordinate structure? So that would be like saying, what did Mary go shopping and Bill bought? Right? What did Mary go shopping and Bill bought? That's just not acceptable. So, but look at this sentence. 16a. What do you think? When will she come and what will she bring? This is completely acceptable, right? So in the direct dependency, you would erase what? That's 16b. And then you would move when and what. Maybe there's a way of doing it, I don't know. But it doesn't look so good to me. But I'm not impartial at this point, right? I have a theory that I believe in, so you guys should be the judge of this. How will it be explained in the theory that I'm presenting, the indirect dependency? Basically, what it says is, you have conjunction of questions, right? When will she come and what will she bring? You do if there is a way to combine the two, you take the two questions and you choose the problem, you conjoin each proposition, right? You take a proposition from question 1 and a proposition from question 2 and you conjoin them, you intersect them. So it's a set of propositions such that there's a proposition in question 1 and a proposition in question 2 that it intersects. Once you do that in the lower clause, then it's a simple matter of asking which of these propositions does Mary think. So just to spell this out, all of the action is here, right? This stays the same. P equals you think Q, right? This part, nothing changes. All you need is, when will she come? She will come at 7. She will come at 8. What will she bring? She will bring dessert. She will bring rice, whatever. And then what you create out of this is the set of propositions P such that there exists a Q in this, there exists a Q in this, and P prime is the intersection of Q and Q prime. Okay? So whichever way you interpret this, when will she come? And what will she bring? Once you've interpreted this, which you have to do anyway, this because we can conjoin questions, then it serves the same purpose that the other one did, right? Because you're going to look for all the cues that belong in this conjunction. Okay? So there isn't a syntactic problem here at all. We don't need syntax to do the job for us. It comes from the semantics. The second one, and this is an interesting one. Okay? This will be fun before lunch. So if I ask you, who is taller than he is? What kind of a question is that? Not he meaning the same person, not who is taller than he, no. Who is the person who is taller than himself? That's the question I'm asking. Kind of can't make sense of it, right? Okay, good. So remember, the person who asked this question is a little loopy. Whose height is such that it is more than that height, right? It doesn't make any sense. However, who does Mary think is taller than he is? This makes sense, right? Because now we have Mary's thought worlds, she's mistaken, and his actual height. So when you ask the question, who does Mary think is taller than he is, you extracted who from the embedded clause. But because it's embedded under thought worlds, what you're asking, name the person whose height in Mary's belief worlds is more than his height in the actual world, right? That makes sense? Yes. Okay. Now let us ask the scope marking question. What does Mary think? Who is taller than he is? This is the same crazy thought, right? So again, this is an argument against an extraction-based account. Why does this not work in... So indirect dependency correctly rules it out because the embedded question is interpreted by itself without regard to what's above it, right? So it's simply take the question, who is taller than he is? And then ask which of her thoughts belong in one of these. But the question by itself, who is taller than he is an odd question. So another problem, I think, for the indirect dependency. Third one, it takes too long to explain and I get confused, you'll get confused. The scope freezing is very good. Those of you who are Utpal Lahiri students can ask him. He is very good at explaining this. This data he's the one. So scope freezing was shown by Kroc to Tony Kroc, who argued for an ambiguity that emerges when you have embedding, so in extraction. But the shape of the argument that Utpal gave was, look, when you have extraction, there's a certain ambiguity. When you look at scope marking, that ambiguity disappears. Why is that? Because there is no extraction. It's whatever was there in the local clause. I'm going to go to the more general point now, which is acquisition of scope marking. So, everybody okay with this idea that there are two views on scope marking? That sequential scope marking is problematic if you want to create an LF with the equivalent of extraction. And that there is an alternative semantics that interprets the two questions kind of separately and then just ties them. The second question is the resource for the quantification in the first question. So everybody okay with that? Those two general ideas? Now I'm going to go to yes.
About the view on direct dependency.
Mm-hmm.
So how do they deal with things like, what do you think? Is John coming to the party? So how do they deal with this?
So they would say, so they'll say two things on that. The first thing they would say is that German doesn't allow that. So they would say, look, that's an argument for direct dependency on the view that the yes-no operator can't move up. However, if you ask yourself in English or in Hindi, what do you think? Will he come? You totally get that reading, right? And also in Hindi, तुम्हें क्या लगता है? वो आएगा? So then they said, okay, maybe in Hindi there's indirect dependency, not in German. But the problem with German is that they get it for the sequential, for the subordinated case. I think German and Hungarian both don't allow it. But they also have a kind of, they have the equivalent of a weather. And there's some issue about, I forget how exactly it's done, but the facts are not straightforward in either account. Namely that if you have a weather, it's the oath clause doesn't give you a well-formed scope marking. So it's not that it follows straightforwardly on the indirect dependency approach either, right? The good ones follow. For them, the bad ones follow. So, yeah, I'm presenting a slightly biased take on this, no? So it's for you to check out the other side more stringently. But actually, I'm not presenting it. These facts that I'm giving are real. I should say that one person, so this data that I had on the comparative, was actually presented for German. So I'm basing it off of that. But recently, Magda Kaufmann, I presented this at UConn, and she seems very, very convinced that some of these data only apply to sequential, not to subordinated. But I went back and I checked Marta Rice and Arnim von Stekov, both of them look at this comparative case at least, and in the subordinated case. So there's some issue that I would like to go back and check on the data. But so far, for the sequential, there's no doubt that the indirect dependency is needed. So another way to think about it is this. You have sequential scope marking. Syntactically, you cannot merge them into one, right? So you do need indirect dependency for those. The question is, do you then also need a direct dependency for the subordinated cases, or can indirect dependency be applied across the board? Maybe that's a way to think about it. But here's an interesting fact that puzzled people for a while, and it's still puzzling them, it seems. So in many studies, they document the emergence of scope marking in L1. So in child language, scope marking has widely been attested. And also in L2 learning and L3 learning, even when their L1 doesn't have scope marking. That's what they say. So that's the first thing. This is Thornton, and then for French, and then adult Japanese speakers acquisition of English. So neither Japanese apparently has scope marking nor English. This is their take on it. So here's the examples. What do you think, who ate the cookie? So this is from Thornton, okay? This is child language. And they also have this copy, who do you think who ate the cookie? What they noticed, as I remember, is that once they got extraction, 19B dropped out of their grammar, but 19A stayed on. So scope marking continued. And then this is from French, 20 is from French in L1, and 21 is scope marking L2. So this is people learning Japanese speakers learning English. What do you think? Who loved Mr. Yellow? What do you think? Who did he love? So some errors, but the main point is these are scope marking structures. And here are two comments made in Roper and de Villiers 2011. So sequential scope marking was discovered in 1996 in German and in English. And in 2011, they write, how can children know a property of UG which to the average person remains so arcane? And they all occur as spontaneous behavior even when not in the target language. But my point is, give me a target language that does not have scope marking. English has scope marking, it's just used in colloquial English more than in written English. But children don't read, they don't learn from reading, they learn from what's around them. So the fact to me, the fact that it is in every, that it is attested so widely in acquisition is not, there's nothing surprising about it. So I think this is kind of fun, a fun fact. And then interestingly, in addition to English, Japanese also have scope marking. So this is due to Fujimura. The only difference is they use how instead of what. But again, how is also used in many languages to ask propositions. So that's 22 is the example from there to show that Japanese has scope marking. So this is, now what is the connection between sequential scope marking and subordinated scope marking? I'm sort of drawing on Rice's ideas here. So sequential scope marking, what does it involve? It involves the juxtaposition of two questions. One is a restriction on the propositional WH argument of the other, right? If you ask yourself, if you turn the question around, not why do children learn it so early, and ask the question, what would it take for them to not learn scope marking? Because on this view that I'm presenting, okay, wait, sorry, let me back off a little bit. So, diachronically, some languages develop a subordinated version. So, it is true that not all languages have the kind of subordinated scope marking that Hindi and German have. And this shift accounts for the great degree of overlap in the properties of sequential and subordinated scope marking, and for the properties on which they diverge, such as binding of variables inside Q2, right? So, that's the idea. So, going back to acquisition of scope marking is expected if input is taken to be sequential scope marking. Production data is consistent with sequential scope marking, and typically in these child language or acquisition data, there is no subject-ox inversion. So, you can't, it's not that they're producing subordinated scope marking that we can tell. They're really producing sequential scope marking, which is, let's say, is a universal. And what is needed for the acquisition of scope marking and indirect dependency? There are two things. One, they need knowledge that questions can range over propositions, right? So that the first question, what do you think, can be processed, and clearly they do. And the second, that quantification in natural language is restricted. That's all they need. And presumably that the children learn pretty early. So it's really not about learning extraction. I think the literature, because we started by looking at it in terms of extraction, scope marking is always, acquisition of scope marking has always been studied in relation to subordination and extraction. And I think that perhaps what we need to look at is simply, have they acquired proposition, quantification over proposition? Have they acquired restriction? That quantification is restricted. My guess is that those two things come pretty early. You could not stop a kid from producing scope marking if you wanted to, because they really don't need to learn about subordination or extraction. That's all they need. So that's my my take on this. I think it's kind of interesting. Okay. Do we have energy for the last? Did I see a question? No. Okay. I don't want to race through it, but I will a little bit, because I do want to leave time for workshop, right? And I do want to leave time for lunch. Maybe I'll pick it up tomorrow if I see there's any interest. I've given you all the things that I know that have been worked out either by me or other people. But there are three things that are open questions in the literature. One is negative island effect, predicate restriction, and discourse status. And I'm simply going to give you the first two. I'm just going to tell you what they are, and then I will discuss the third one, because I think that will wake you up before lunch. Okay? All right. What is the negative island effect? It's simply this. When it comes to abstraction, I can also ask, the matrix clause can have negation. So you can ask, okay, I didn't put in the extract. So look at 23, A and B. What don't you think? Where should we go? That sounds pretty impossible to figure out. But that would either, where don't you think we should go? This is not a problem, right? Because there are some places that don't serve good food or whatever is not clean, whatever you could say, I don't think we should go there. So it's not a problem in terms of what would it logically mean, but we can't do it with scope marking. And not only with negation, you can also say, what does nobody think? Where should we go? That also sounds bad. So this is known as the negative island effect. However, it's not really a negative island effect, because if you look at 25 and 26, I can ask, what does everyone think? Where should we go? What do most people think? Where should we go? If there's disagreement, let's go with the majority. That also can work. But what does nobody think? Where should we go? Doesn't work. But also, what do a few people think? That also seems a little odd. What do some people think? Where should we go? So I'm just giving you the data here. That's one issue. And then there's predicate restrictions. Like, there are two types of predicate restrictions. One is what we discussed earlier. This is on slide 30. What did Bill ask? Where should we go? That sounds weird. Whereas same with what did Bill ask? Who should go where? They both sound pretty bad. However, and this is back to your echo questions. What did Bill ask? Who should go where? Who should go there? That sounds reasonably good. And the semantics we can do later. So anyway, this is that type of predicate restriction the first kind has been explained and can be explained. There's another kind that is an open question. What does Bill think? Where did he go? That's good. What does Bill deny? Where did he go? Kind of odd. What does Bill regret? Where did we go? All of these, there's something off. So this is, these are two open questions. And a third one that has not been looked at, which is the one that I want to present and account for. Okay, are they really the same, even in the basic cases? And this goes back to Herberger. She was the first one to point out that the two have slightly different presuppositions. So if you look at 30A, what does George believe who Rosa kissed? This is a scope marking, the first one, subordinated. And the second one, who does George believe that Rosa has kissed? And her point was that 30B, the extraction, lends itself to the no one answer. So you and I don't have to believe that she kissed someone. George has to believe that. And I can ask, so who does George think she kissed? But according to her, if you say, what does George believe? Who has Rosa kissed? There's something off about it. And I'm going to present a proposal on the next page about the felicity conditions of scope marking. So the first part is what we have already seen for all questions. The felicity condition of regular questions are that the answer to the question is not in the common ground, right? That the speaker wants to find out the answer, and the speaker believes the addressee knows the answer. Furthermore, the felicity conditions of a scope marking question of this form, Q, Q0, Q1, Q2, okay? And staying away from whether it's sequential or scope marking, just Q1, Q2 is the following. So, the scope marking question, Q0 over Q1, Q2 are, the answer to Q0 is not in the common ground, right? Because this is the matrix question. So it's simply what we had earlier. The speaker wants to find out the answer to Q0, right? And the speaker believes the addressee knows the answer to Q0. This is just copying what we had onto this structure, the matrix. Additionally, Q0 presupposes the following. That there exists some Q, let's call it just Q2 for present purposes, such that the answer to Q2 is not in the common ground. So this, we don't know. Remember, this is something this is an embedded or a second question. So this answer is not in the common ground. And the speaker and the addressee both want to know Q2, the answer to Q2. And third thing, the answer to Q0 can help settle this. So this is slightly different from saying the answer to Q0 is the answer to Q2. No. By figuring out the answer to Q0, we can figure out the answer to Q2. And I'm going to give you the cases where that show this. Okay. Let me think which one would be the best use of our time. Okay. So basically I want to derive the negative island and the predicate restrictions from this, but I'm going to go to slide 37. Okay. So this is basically the question. So the idea is, if I ask, where should we go? That's what we are all interested in. And then we say, what does he think? What does Avinash think? Where should we go? In some sense, we're giving him the authority, right? He is someone whose views matter. Maybe he is the local expert. Maybe he is the one who's decides, who's in charge of this. But there's some sense in which he's the authority, right? So his views matter. Similarly, everyone, majority rules. We live in a democratic country. So that is what we are doing when we are asking a scope marking structure. We are a construct question. We are really interested. The main point of the question is Q2. Q1, the role of the matrix is really a way of settling that. The subject of Q1 is some kind of authority. Of course, the negative island predicate restrictions will follow from that. But this is the question I want to pose. What if it is the second person, addressee? What do you think? We're always asking this, right? That's the most natural kind of scope marking construction. Sounds like there's some mismatch here, but I think in fact it is really interesting. So the question is this: if I say, what do you think, where should we go? Is it the same as asking, where should we go? Because where should we go? I'm asking the addressee. Addressee knows the answer, where we should go. And here I'm saying, addressee's thoughts are going to settle where should we go. So, what's the difference? But here's the difference. Look at context 1 on slide 37. Assume that, do people still wear watches? Some do, mostly, but let's say the phone, don't have a phone. Mary doesn't know the time, right? And there's a passerby, she asks, excuse me, what time is it? This is completely fine, right? But now you say, excuse me, what do you think? What's the time? There's something really odd about it, right? Okay, let's look at the felicity conditions that it shows that just because it's the same, the subject of the point of view person, the matrix, is the same as the addressee, doesn't mean that a scope marking can be collapsed to just Q2. Okay? And this is an example. And what does it violate? In the felicity conditions, remember the speaker and the addressee should both be interested in the answer. In this case, the addressee couldn't care less, like we don't know what it is. So the excuse me is a way of showing that there's no collusion, no implicit understanding. And now we look at the second two cases. So notice that you couldn't do extraction either very easily, right? You don't say, excuse me, what do you think is the time? Is also a bit odd. So that's all this is showing, is that you can't, this is not equivalent to this, right? That's what that is showing. But context 2 and context 3, I think, are very interesting. So context 2, John is in the library waiting for the reference librarian to come back from lunch. He goes to the person at the circulation desk and he can ask the extraction question, right? When do you think the reference librarian will come back from lunch? Because, they work in the same place. But he can't say, what do you think? When will the reference librarian come back? So the circulation guy is busy with his own things, right? You go up to him and you say, so what do you think? Right? So this is quite interesting, but it's a pretty sharp difference. And this is because it is not a shared quest for Q2. But context 3, I think one can make it work. So you're at the bus stop, you're waiting, both people are, and it's obvious that you're waiting and the bus is delayed. And now you can, of course, say how much longer do you think it will be, or when do you think the next bus will come? But you can also say, so what do you think? How much longer will it be? And it becomes okay because you're both, the context makes it clear that you're both on the same quest.
Wouldn't it be the same for that sentence which you found as odd? Excuse me, what do you think is the time? If both the people do not have watches with them and
Yeah, if they're sitting around, then it would work. So again, so I think what is crucial is that this is a joint. In a standard question, it's all about speaker not knowing and hearer knowing. And that translates into the extraction case, right? Because in the normal case, it's just that there's an embedding involved. But the scope marking is really about the embedded clause. It's not about the main clause. The main clause is the point of view. It's an important point of view, a relevant point of view towards resolving Q2. So that's one piece of it. But the second piece of it is that it's got to include both the hearer and the speaker and the hearer, which I think need not have been the case. So just to give you so I think this, I don't know, at this point I feel it's pretty new, this idea, but I feel fairly comfortable about this. I should say that I use this also to derive the negative island effects, etc. But I think the two pieces are separate. The fact that both speaker and hearer are on the quest, and that the main clause is a point of view, a relevant point of view, are independent, and this may actually be an important way of separating out. See, the negative island effect has been noted for many constructions. One thing is called slifting, WH slifting, where should we go, do you think? Yeah, that's a slifting construction, and there's some others involved. Those may not, again, I don't take me at my word literally, those also don't allow negation. So where do you think, where should we go, don't you think, is pretty bad. But it may not be the case that both speaker and hearer need to be, I don't know, I haven't looked at that. But logically, it's possible to have a construction that requires point of view, that has where the main point is the embedded or the second question or the apparently embedded question, and the apparently main clause is really a point of view kind of a role. It plays a point of view role in the discourse, but it's possible that it may allow the addressee, just the speaker, to be on the quest, not the hearer. So I'm not sure whether this is the case, but to me it seems like logically possible to have two separate cases. Okay, so any questions? Yes, Martha.
Does the nature of the question we ask after what do you think
Mm-hmm.
have something to do with whether it sounds felicitous or not? Because when we ask about time, time is more sort of it's not up for debate as to what time is.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say what do you think? So if there's someone walking in front of me and there's a passerby and I say what do you think? Where is that man going?
Mm-hmm.
Does it sound just as odd as us saying what do you think? What time is it?
Well, ask. So
I don't think it sounds just as bad as
quite as bad. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Yeah.
On a continuing note,
Mm-hmm.
if I find some person who doesn't have a watch as well,
Mm-hmm.
but I want to know the time, and if I ask that person, what do you think the time must be? Now, that sounds quite.
But you did extraction, so that's fine. What do you think would be the time? Must be the time.
Can.
You want to say, what do you think? What must the time be? That's different, right? So, okay, let me get all the L. And your point was?
So initially when we were discussing 37,
Uh-huh.
extraction question doesn't sound as good as in 38,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is the reason what the answer is saying.
Mhm.
When you talk about thinking, it's sort of something subjective as opposed to time, which is objective.
Okay.
That's why
Okay.
the extraction sounds bad. In an otherwise situation where both of them, like one person is interested in the time while the other isn't.
Mm-hmm. And it's clear that you haven't had. Okay.
Yeah, so
Uh-huh.
situations being same, that is what determines where the extraction would be possible or
Okay. Praveen?
Roughly,
Mhm.
according from what she said, maybe in the first case where you're looking for time, you'd want to see whether somebody has a watch on.
Mm-hmm.
Or
Mm-hmm.
her. With watch, I don't think it is to be debated whether when the answer comes, you would not debate. Okay, you can.
Mm-hmm.
But so and in that, I don't think you can really ask that question in that case. I find it odd, when somebody has a
Mm-hmm.
watch with him or her. What do you think?
Is the yeah.
You see,
So
that's a question that you would ask only when you're basically asking the other person also to guess or make some conjecture about
so
it.
but that's true also for extraction. So that's not separating extraction from scope marking, no? So yeah.
I was thinking along the lines of how so what time is it? What do you think? What time is it? So it sounds bad. The second
Mhm.
sounds bad. When so if someone's walking in front of you and there's a passerby and you ask, where do you think he's where is he going? You can ask
Mhm,
a direct question. Where is he going? I don't necessarily think that means the same as asking what do you think? Where is he going? That's in that respect the two wouldn't.
Okay. So you're saying so there are several strands and one needs to think about this a little bit, and I will. So one issue was time as a given.
Yeah.
Whereas all of these point of views relevant when there's something more subjective about the nature of the question. Ooh, this is
But in that same context that you said, you asked the same question about time, then also it becomes relevant, right?
In the sense that
Like if suppose two people are walking and see a passerby, they haven't talked and then they ask this question, what do you think? Where is he going? So that's the one that you are referring to, right?
yeah, and I'm saying that's
And in
not
that
the same
same-
as asking where is he going.
Of course, yeah. But in that same context, if somebody asks, what do you think? What time is it? So even then, the same logic applies for when because the second person might not be thinking about time or the person who
Okay.
is doing it.
It's we're asking somebody
That case is separate.
Srikar, you had a thought?
Yeah, I mean, basically that. I don't think it has anything to do with time being subjective or whatever. You can say, what do you think? What should that dog be called to a stranger and still find the sentence very odd?
Well, see, okay, so what I would like, because this is something that's fresh hot off the presses kind of a thing. I gave this talk 2 months ago now, and literally on 2 days before the talk, because I've been struggling with this. What is the difference? Actually, for a long time, I've been wondering why are people still debating direct indirect. Every paper on scope marking is about direct indirect dependency. Why aren't they looking at discourse? And then I realized, who are you to say why aren't they doing it? Do it yourself if you care. So then I started thinking about it, and so certainly I think there are many issues that may be relevant here. So one thing is, you don't ask a stranger something that they may, like the name of the dog or where that other person is going. Remember, the addressee must know, you must think the addressee knows the answer. So the reason I took the thing about time is because, I created that context. So one would have to have a context where maybe, it's their child and you want to know what's the child's name. But then you would say that's still going to be See, I'm not sure that that's the subjective objective thing will hold up completely, but it's something to think about. But in creating these contexts, then one has to control that without the you think that's a question you could ask. You can't just ask a stranger, excuse me, what's that person's name? That's, unless you have a basis for thinking. Yeah.
Pragmatically, we can at least ask objective question. It's very difficult to ask subjective question without the context. So what I felt odd about these questions?
So, but wait, no. So, 37A, yeah, that's without a context, right? That's what the excuse me does. So, 37 is the one without a context, right?
But my point is basically, it sounds like Yanchin said, it sounds odd if you ask about objective, subjective part rather than an objective part.
So,
It
give
sounds
me,
less odd if you ask some objective question like time or where does this road go, rather than what do you think something. If it is subjective, it's more odd.
But then would you consider 36 A to be subjective or not?
56?
I don't even know what the objective or not.
yeah. So, here's what would be helpful. Maybe tomorrow's workshop we could make on this. Maybe today's, I don't know, tomorrow's, because I had other plans for today. But everybody has thoughts, so now.
The first question, what do you think, doesn't it itself give scope for objectivity?
See, I don't know what objective and subjective means. I'm a little. Huh?
Doesn't it, what do you think?
Yeah.
Scope for subjectivity, and then asking an question.
Something that he has the time. Maybe that. Okay, so that's what you were meaning? Okay, I hadn't thought of that. I think. What's your name? Swarali's point is, when you ask what do you think, then you're asking for an opinion. Whereas, if, all I have to do is look at there's no opinion, right? It's 1:05. That's, I think, what they were saying. What is wrong with the choice of the word think, and that's why it's bad also in extraction, right? Because you're embedding. So this was really simply a way of saying that even when the addressee is in, the same as the subject is the same as the addressee, but you're right that may be, but then I would like to see if one can ask someone something where it's subjective in your view, which would be?
But wouldn't it follow from so we said
Okay.
that we assume that the addressee doesn't know the answer either, right? So
Yeah.
that should take care of what we are thinking as subjective and objective. So suppose you and I are talking and we both of us don't have a watch, I still
Can ask, yes.
in either extraction.
Or scope marking. Yes. So the two, one way to think about it is, okay, suppose we do, and in fact that was an example or context that people gave me, like we have, eclipse was on the horizon those days, so we were both waiting for the eclipse, and so I can say, so what do you think, even though you're a stranger, but the context tells me you're there, what do you think, is it time? Yeah? Or what time is it?
What do you think is also sort of includes you in the
Yeah.
for the common quest.
But the first one was really a way of separating out was a way of saying this is not the same as this, right? Even when everything in here is equivalent to the addressee, blah, blah, right? The second part was, if you're both sitting waiting for the, eclipse or whatever, then we can ask an objective question. So what do you think? What time is it? Because we know that at 9 sharp such and such will happen. So that's still your objective question that can go under thing. So, but I think 38A, B, that contrast is real, right? Because both of us are not on that quest. Again, there also, it's in that sense, it may not be subjective, right? The person can answer, the reference librarian comes back from lunch at 12:30 sharp, right? But I can ask the person, when do you think she'll come back? And he can give me so I don't know, maybe subjective, objective may be a factor in thinking, I'm not sure but you can think about this more. It's a good question, like So methodologically, then one thing to do is not just to have one example, right? You have to create, of course, all these things. Once someone has done it, it's easy to see what else should be done. But we have to create context, like maybe this versus this, to show a range of things where we could expect that person to have a thought about it, right? So you would have to ask somebody, like a teacher, about what courses should one take, or something like that. Maybe that would satisfy that, right? Okay, time to stop. And then when we come back, we'll talk about the workshop part of the deal, right?